I'm Dr. Joseph MT, Department of Sociology, University of Mumbai, and this is the E-Pathshala project on religion and society. We are in module 32, which is globalization and religion. Globalization is a phenomenon that is going on in a very major scale in the world today. According to Arjun Appadurai, he talks about the different kind of processes in globalization through 5 different scapes. In this module, we look at how these kind of scapes and these kind of developments that are happening in globalization are intersecting with religion, or how religion is intersecting with processes of globalization. This is what we are going to see in this module. Defining globalization, religion, relationship. T.K. Uman traces globalization of culture from geographical exploration of the 16th century and colonialism which followed it. Before that, people were in contact with this was confined to the immediate religions. Whereas with colonialism and colonial construction of culture, the world came to be recognized in an altogether different manner. The cultural discourse of colonialism also created a division between the culture of the old world and the new modern world. The people from old and traditional societies were constructed as others by the colonialists. Women call these constructs of culture as savage, the black other, and the oriental other. But the question arises how globalization is different from other forms of conquest and colonization. David Lehman summarizes the phenomenon of contemporary globalization as distinct from early forms of colonization in a very concrete manner. Religion, he says, in spite of being a personal affair, is influenced by the transmitted ideas of a globalized world. Religion, being an important component of culture, needs to be discussed in the light of cultural globalization. Religion drives culture and social forms, which is also evident from the definitions given by some eminent sociologists like Durkheim or Clifford Geertz. Religion is a unified system of beliefs and practices, or is the system of symbols which acts to establish powerful, pervasive and long-lasting moods and motivations in people. Religion and globalization can in various manifestations be seen as partners. History pays testimony to the fact that the growth and influence of Christianity was a result of the link between its own global ambitions and the expansion of various political and economic regimes. Elements of similar historical pattern can be found in Buddhism, Islam, and other faiths as well. Section 2, Globalization and Religion in the Contemporary World. Globalization has led to massive social changes in the world. Undoubtedly, religion is not immune from these changes and their burgeoning effects brought about by globalization. This also includes rapid changes in the moral beliefs and value system of people. New religious networks are emerging which are transnational in character. As globalization disembeds religions from their historic homelands and scatters them around the world, we can clearly observe how social processes try to globalize a particular religion. For instance, the way Hindu temples and ashrams are becoming increasingly transnational, and how African and Korean churches are booming in Europe and North America, is relatively a new phenomenon. John Zavos refers to 3 organizations: the National Council for Hindu Temples, the Hindu Council UK, and the Hindu Forum of Britain. Together, these 3 organizations, purporting to represent Hindus, have developed a public profile in the UK over a period of 30 years. They have a significant role to play in the public representation of Hindu-ness. It is also surprising to see how in most of Europe, including in France, where the Age of Enlightenment originated, beliefs in occult powers and reincarnation have gained firm grounds. Therefore, we can say that globalization has played a tremendous role in the revivalism and resurgence of some religions, as they are today not relegated to the few countries where their roots began. It is here that Appadurai's idea of mediascapes and technoscapes need to be mentioned. When we see growing number of television channels, radio stations and print media founded solely for advocating religious values, the role of media in the globalization process becomes observable. For instance, we see how India's devotional channels like Astha Sanskar, MH1, Shraddha, Bhakti TV and God Asia are gaining popularity. Taking Islam as an example, we find TV channels like Iqra, Enas, Majd, Al-Huda, Irahama, which are purely religious channels created for the purpose of strengthening the fortification of Islam. Besides, as the technology grew under globalization, improvements in the transportation means contributed considerably to the emergence, revivalism, and fortification of religion. In this respect, Brian Turner states that Islamic revivalism in Asia is related to the improvement in transportation that has allowed many Muslims to travel to Mecca and return with reformist ideas. When people move across borders, they also carry with themselves their ideas, values, and systems. They constitute a landscape, and together they appear to affect the politics of nations. For instance, Punjabi Sikhs settled in Canada enjoy a large say in their government. This was evident from the 42nd Canadian federal elections, where 18 Punjabis were elected as members of the House of Commons in Canada. Vertovec also records that the patterns of migration and settlement creates social conditions that encourage caste and regionally defined groups to invest in the institutionalization of religious practices. Another example of ethnoscape can be seen with the early Buddhists who traveled from northern India to China and Japan and spread stories of the Buddha and his teachings wherever they went. Although digital technology now allows religious ideas to be communicated quickly through websites and video, personal interaction remained the most effective means of dissemination at that time. Christian Pentecostalism spread successfully in the 20th century from North and South America to Africa and Asia, chiefly as a result of traveling missionaries who brought their gospel message to new communities. Similarly, religious values and ideas being central to people's culture also have an influence over the ideologies of other people. Ideas travel at much faster rate in the globalized world, which alter and get altered by others' views. In the process of borrowing, transmitting, and exchanging cultural products, very often an ideology is also transmitted, which can be understood as ideoscape. Woman also argues that though material culture has a high propensity to spread, but non-material or symbolic dimension of the culture gradually follows. So much so that the idea of a cultural lag as propounded by Ogburn do exist in sociology. Although it is doubtful whether we can confidently propose an idea of global religion in the present times, because a global religion would have to presuppose a global community where people must share common beliefs, experiences, and sentiments. Turner argues that unfortunately global networks are too thin and fragile to serve as the social carriers of a shared set of symbols and practices. Therefore, he says that it would be misleading to talk about religion as a homogeneous phenomenon. Even David Lehman argues on the similar lines: in a universal religion is hard to establish. On the contrary, globalization may bring about the unpacking of local cultural complexes. It may also create multifarious local identities, so much so that diversity is seen in local spaces. To illustrate with examples, Caribbean Pentecostal churches, Nigerian Aladura churches, or branches of the Zimbabwe Assemblies of God, Africa, in Britain and Ghanaian Pentecostal churches are so different from any British religious institutions. Turner further argues that in the globalized world, local or mass religion and the elite religion interact to result in religious localization, which means simultaneously the co-presence of both universalizing and particularizing tendencies. For instance, while the Aman Hesar is a rapidly expanding Brazilian religion, where elements of Christianity, Brazilian indigenous beliefs, and European Spiritism appear merged together with Afro-Brazilian traditions. Woman argues that there is no possibility of a global culture, as there are four interrelated processes involved in its creation: homogenization, pluralization, traditionalization, and hybridization. Homogenization refers to popularization and diffusion of cultural symbols to reduce cultural diversity. The homogenization thesis proclaims that global culture is becoming standardized around a Western or American pattern. Rapid communication and constant flow of products across the borders often gives us the impression of homogenization. For instance, popularity of blue jeans of pop music or democratic ideas can be seen as part of a homogenizational process. It is important to remember here that homogenization can often lead to hegemonization, assimilation of the minority and weaker sections into the mainstream. From the religious perspective, it can be seen that the attempts of the extreme Hindu right, the Sangh Parivar in India, is believed to impose its homogenizing fascism on the lines of Brahminic ethos. There have been repeated attempts by such Hindutva groups to bring homogeneity by forced conversions and communal tensions. Increasing incidents of violence among Muslims, Christians, and Dalits, especially in the decades of 1980s and later, were conducted by different organizations. T.N. Madan, on the contrary, says that Hinduism, which is demographically dominant and even hegemonic, is nothing but a federation of faiths. It has both horizontal and vertical distribution rather than a single homogeneous religion. In this line, we can say that pluralism and not homogeneity is inherent in Hinduism because it comprises many regional cultural groups. Pluralization implies existence and practice of more than one forms of culture simultaneously. A reactive process to the phenomenon of homogenization and hegemonization by the weaker culture results in revivalism leading to traditionalization. It stresses a return to traditional values of hard work, craftsmanship, local culture, tribal or clan orientation, and non-material values in response to an excess of materialism, consumerism, and technology. For instance, paganists are often seen to stress a return to old cultural values that predated the existence of the state system, or Gandhi's romanticization of village life over industrial cities and can be seen as traditionalism. And lastly, if in the process of adaptation we retain some of the traditional aspects and entwine them with some modern aspects, this process is usually referred to as hybridization. Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, who has built a global spirituality program, conducts rock satsans in his Bangalore ashram almost every evening, where people sing along and dance to his devotional songs. It is one of the clearest manifestations of hybridization, where rock music is blended with traditional and devotional touch to cater to the needs of the Indian masses. Following Arjun Appadurai, we may call such global markets for the religious scape of modernity. Brian Turner argues that globalization has also somewhat blurred the distinction between what Weber, virtuoso, and mass religion. He differentiates between the two as thus: the religion of the elite satisfies the moral and intellectual needs of religious virtuosi, and the religion of the masses caters to the thaumaturgical interests of disprivileged. Accessibility to ancient religious texts by people from all ranks of Indian society can be seen as an apt example of globalization. The way Sanskritic texts like Upanishads and Vedas are now open to mass interpretation are kept preserved for the elite Brahmins in India. Section 3. The rise of the spiritual market. However, we cannot ignore the observable changes in the spiritual market with the coming up of globalized economy and the rise of the mass consumer markets. As a consequence of global communication, we now witness a spiritual marketplace of popular kitsch religiosity. The neo-Hindu cults, driven by a new concept of Guru, who is a leader of the spiritual movement or organization, now focus on this worldly concerns derived from modern Western technologies of self-healing, highlighting transcendental meditation and yoga rather than reincarnation and karma in South Asian religious cultures. New rituals and new gods are being invented in the market, where spiritualism is mixed with capitalism and consumerism. Examples are plenty to illustrate in the process of commodification of religion. The Gayatri Parivar's novel and the scientific interpretation of the Gayatri Mantra and the Hose Yagya invented a whole new way of explaining the significance of a ritual. Nanda notes that apart from popularizing Gayatri Mantra and Yagyas, the Parivar also offers courses in moral upliftment and stress management, and to the government and private sector professionals. Besides the local gods and goddesses, which were until recently associated with the more plebeian masses, are finding new homes in a swanky new suburbs with malls and multiplexes. Globalization, if on the one hand has led to the commodification of religion, it also created a religious surge among the masses, as is evident from the boom in pilgrimage and invention of new and more ostentatious rituals. According to a recent study by NCAER, religious trips account for more than 50% of all package tours, much higher than leisure tour packages at 28%. The most recent figures show that in 2004, more than 23 million people visited the Balaji temple at Tirupati, where 17.25 million trekked to the mountain shrine of Vaishno Devi. The statistics conform to the global pattern pounded by Lehman, where globalization has created strong transnational ties of belonging and similarity by visiting religions, praises, and pilgrimages. How globalization has encouraged Hinduism, the case of India. The phenomenon of globalization buttresses the neoliberal ideology too. The core of neoliberalism is the belief that unconstrained market forces will bring prosperity, democracy, and peace to all people in all societies. The underlying principle is that the borderless market should lead without the government intervention, while privatization, disinvestment, and reregulation are the pillars of neoliberalism. The state is not made entirely irrelevant. The state's topmost priority under the regime of neoliberal globalization is to facilitate the smooth running of the markets. Much of the contemporary critique of neoliberalism can be traced to the works of Karl Polanyi. He argues that the laissez-faire system came into existence with the help of the state. Expansion of the pre-market and self-protective reaction against it by the state and the society is called double movement. Polanyi's hope lay with society and the nation-state, but today they have been rendered less powerful with the rise of globalization. On the contrary, what is emerging is that neoliberalism is changing the texture of democracy. The accumulation of private profit has become the highest social good that the government promotes. For instance, Chandrababu Naidu, the Andhra Pradesh chief minister who wanted to turn Hyderabad into Cyberabad, was aided by the World Bank to commercialize the agriculture in 1997 to 2005, during the time period when neoliberalism was the reigning ideology of the state government. Nanda writes that when government becomes more like a for-profit corporation, the citizens are entered to the positions of consumers. Their relationship with the state changes from that of citizens to that of clients of government services. This model of marketplace is encouraged by the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, where the latter, the better off and more educated consumers, citizens, manage to get more choices, while the poor are bypassed. There are two broad areas where an outright influence of globalization can be seen upon Hinduism in India: education and tourism. With the commercialization of higher education in India, new priest training schools and deemed universities are mushrooming. Meerananda records how such universities produce English-speaking computer-using pujaris, astrologers, vastu shastris, and other providers of religious services. She argues that under the previous BJP administration, the UGC had approved BA and even MA and PhD level courses in subjects like Vedic astrology, and had pushed for courses in Vastu Shastra and opened it up to the business of God, men and women as well. Gurus and Swamis are entering into the business of conferring degrees in priestcraft and astrology, and even setting up modern institutions with traditional bent. The best example could be Sri Sri University, set up by spiritual leader Sri Sri Ravi Shankar in 2009, which boasts of his tagline, holistic modern education combined with ancient Indian values. Besides Swami Vivekananda Yoga Anusandhana Sanstana in Bangalore and Bihar, Yoga Bharati in Fort Munger in Bihar offer advanced degrees all the way to PhDs in yoga services or sciences. Sandipani Pratishthan, established in 1987, an autonomous organization of the Ministry of the Human Resource Development, funds gurukuls all across the country and serves as their accrediting body. Another sector where the corporate and even the state are making a common cause with Hinduism is the religious tourism. It is quite common to see how temple management departments are actively trying to turn some remote temple into a pilgrimage spot by reinventing a story among them. For instance, the newly invented rituals like gold car in temples of Tamil Nadu, or the reenactment of Shiva and Parvati wedding. Another example to show government's involvement in propagating rigorous temple tourism can be seen in the fact how Devasam Board of the Sabarimala temple in Kerala, in full complicity with the state government's electricity board, was involved in a fraud of lighting the divine light, also called Magaravilakku, for which millions of pilgrims turn out every year. Writing in 1982, Franklin Pressler described how Tamil Nadu's HRC tried to turn many temples in the state into pilgrimage centers by publicizing them. Section 4. Impact of globalization upon diasporic religious communities. Internet and other means of mass communication holds the diasporic community together, as it provides an obvious method for dialogue within and between diasporic groups, but at the same time, Turner notes that the unintended consequence of globalization is often that the diasporic politics and their intellectual elites come to depart radically from tradition, building up their own internal notions of authority, authenticity, and continuity. Perhaps the most useful discussion of the diaspora and the information superhighway is to be found in Peter Mandeville's Transnational Muslim Politics. He records how young Muslims learn about Islam from pamphlets and sources in English, for example, the Muslim News and QJ News. Because internet access is often too expensive in the Middle East and Asia, Muslim students in Western universities access the net for religious and political communication are the principal audience of global Islam. Turner argues that internet tends to promote national argument in a way where the traditional gatekeepers of Muslim orthodoxy are bypassed and everybody can, in principle, check the religious sources for themselves. In conclusion, Mandeville argues that the internet is an important technology for creating an imagined community for individuals and groups that are separated from their homeland and residing in an alien culture that are hostile to Islam. The globalization of religion in the 20th century has strong connections with the evolution of a global business ethic and global corporations. One aspect of Appadurai's global religious scape is the adoption and adaptation of religions to the social needs of the middle classes. For instance, the Welsh countryside of Great Britain, Turkish migrants have brought their whirling dervishes to village life, where the local inhabitants are made to believe that whirling is psychologically good for them. Yoga practices from Hinduism have been widely adopted in the West, where practice is stripped of its spiritual significance and developed merely as a meditation technique. Such flows of religious beliefs and in the globalized world also threaten to denude them of their authentic meaning and significance. In this module, we have analyzed the process of globalization. Globalization as a process has influenced and changed and in that sense effected changes in different realms of life. In this module, we have seen how religion has been influenced by processes of globalization and what kind of forms has this actually engendered in the religious sphere. Thank you.